Welcome back everyone, I hope you're well and good. I've been posting videos here on the channel for over a year now, and every one of those videos has been edited on this, my 2016 15-inch MacBook Pro. And now after 6 years of owning it, I'm finally replacing it with Apple's latest 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Max chip and the new redesign. So this is going to be my sort of first impressions and thoughts and review after using it for the first week, and spoiler alert, I really like it. And I thought it'd be good to go over some of the major new changes from the previous design to this one, along with some of the other changes and new features that you get with it. And while there were a few refreshes of the original 2016 design, it was mainly internal spec bumps other than increasing the screen size to 16-inch. But here there's a load of big new changes, even if you picked up one of the older models in recent years, so let's take a look. Now, I actually bought this from Apple's Refurb store. I've talked about this before on the channel. I think it's a great way to make a saving on your tech purchases from Apple, but I thought I'd show you the unboxing here just so you can see how these refurbs come. Apple has a very stringent refurb process. All the refurbs get repackaged in a plain white box. It just has the name of the product and certified refurb printed on it. They come with all the original cables and accessories, even the Apple stickers. They've been tested, had any faulty parts replaced with genuine parts, and they've been cleaned and inspected. So you're basically getting a like new device with a discount, about 10 to 20% on new devices and 30 or even 40% off with some older ones if you're not fussed about the latest tech. Plus you can still buy extended warranty with AppleCare even on refurbs. So go check out my video all about Apple certified refurbs for all the details and things to know, plus a tip on how you can track the refurb stock for free and get notified when what you're looking for becomes available. They do tend to sell pretty quickly. So the main reason why I decided to buy a new Mac is performance. My 2016 MacBook Pro has served me well over the last 6 years, but since I've started making these YouTube videos, it definitely struggles on some of the more intensive things that I throw at it, like editing 4K timelines in Final Cut with lots of layers and animations and such. It was a fairly decent spec Mac at release with a 2.6 GHz quad-core i7 Intel processor, 16 gigs of RAM and a Radeon Pro 450 graphics chip with 2 gigs of video RAM. And in everyday tasks it still performs great, no complaints there, even with some heavy photo editing too. But in Final Cut I'm often having to wait for it to render so I can play back the edit without any hiccups, and it would just often slow down too much and it was just frustrating to use. So I saw that Apple's newest MacBooks were on the Refurb store and I went for the upgrade. And I went for a pretty high spec model too, as I wanted it to last just as long as my last MacBooks. I had my 2016 one for 6 years, and before that my 2011 MacBook Pro for 5. So this time around I went for one with the M1 Max chip and 32 gigs of RAM, double that of my 2016. The M1 Max has 10 CPU cores, 2 for efficiency and 8 for performance versus the 4 cores of my last MacBook. And I know it's not really fair to do this, but I was curious, so I ran a Geekbench test on both Macs just to see how they compared. And obviously the newer MacBook absolutely crushes it. Testing both on battery power, the M1 Max got about a 2.5 times higher score for single core performance and 4.2 times higher on multi-core. And with its big beastie 32 core GPU, the M1 Max got a massive 5.7 times higher on the OpenCL score. Benchmarks aren't everything though, but just generally now, opening up some of my old video projects in Final Cut, the difference is really night and day. I can scrub through and play through an entire unrendered 4K timeline without a single frame drop or hiccup. In fact, it's so good that I've turned off background rendering entirely now in Final Cut, meaning I can save space on my project files and I'm not having to remember to delete the render files after I've finished a video. I did do an export test on one of my recent uploads, a 10-minute 4K video showing some of the shooting modes on the DJI Mini 3 Pro. My old Intel MacBook took 12 minutes and 8 seconds and it just sounded like a jet engine the entire time. Meanwhile, the M1 Max took just 3 minutes and 3 seconds to complete the export without even booting up the fans. It was just chill. And Apple says that the M1 Max can handle far more than this too, able to edit up to 7 streams of 8K ProRes video at a time, far more than anything that I'll be throwing at it anytime soon, but it leaves a lot of headroom for this to last me well into the next few years. It's the kind of performance that you'd expect from a desktop Mac Pro, all crammed into this portable notebook form factor. It's really impressive what Apple has been able to do with their own silicon chips. The screen on the new MacBook Pro is just stunning. It's larger than the 15.4 inch of my 2016 model, now at 16.2 inches, with a slightly higher pixel density, so things look even sharper. The display has been pushed right into the edges now with these slimmer bezels which just curve nicely into the corners. They're calling it a liquid Retina XDR display, XDR like their Pro display, which stands for Extreme Dynamic Range. It now uses the same mini LED tech as in the 12.9 inch iPad Pro, meaning that we get a much better 1:1 contrast ratio. There's 10,000 mini LEDs split into around 2,500 dimming zones, so now things that are black, like a dark scene in a film or the dark elements of an app's interface, are truly black now. It's not that sort of wishy-washy greyish blacks that you see with more traditional LED displays. There is some blooming that I've noticed in extremely contrasty areas, like at high screen brightness with white text on a pure black background. The text seems to almost glow, and that's one of the drawbacks of mini LED displays with their dimming zones versus OLEDs which have individually backlit pixels. But it's not something that I've come across that often, and I've not seen it while watching films or whilst I've been editing. You still get 500 nits of brightness here in standard SDR like before, but now up to 1600 nits of peak brightness for HDR content. And it's just generally an incredible display with rich colours, deeper blacks, and now also ProMotion with up to a 120Hz refresh rate, which dynamically adjusts depending on the content on screen. So it ramps up when you're scrolling through photos or a web page on Safari, for example, and then back down when you're watching a film or when nothing's moving on screen to save battery life. It's really nice, and it just makes working through macOS feel so much smoother and more responsive. The animations look incredible. And if you've ever used an iPad Pro or iPhone 13 with ProMotion, then you'll know what I mean. It's just something that you have to see in person to really get a feel of it. And yes, you've probably seen it already, there's a notch up top now as well. I've never really been that bothered by the notch on the iPhone, but I know that some people absolutely hate it. It is quite big here on the new MacBooks and quite noticeable at first, but I have gotten used to it already, and I do work a lot in full screen mode where it just blends into the black menu bar area. But I'm not really sure why it's so wide. It is just a camera. There's no Face ID up there with all of the dot matrix projectors and sensors. The notch has become quite recognisable from the iPhone, so maybe it's just a marketing and branding thing, or maybe they're planning on putting Face ID in a future model. Speaking of the camera, we finally have a 1080p camera up from 720p. We really are living in the future now. It has a 4-element lens and a wider f2.0 aperture for better low light performance, but there's no center stage here like the latest iPads or M2 MacBook Air. We also have a 3 mic array with high signal to noise ratio and directional beamforming to really hone in on your voice in calls. This is how the mics sound on a 2016 MacBook Pro. And this is how the mics sound on a 2021 MacBook Pro. Much crisper, much clearer, and just so much more sort of depth to the mic sound. There's a real noticeable improvement with the speakers too. They sound so much fuller and deeper now, and they can get pretty loud too. The speakers are really impressive coming from a comparatively small and thin device. One of the first things that I noticed about the newest design was it is actually noticeably heavier and thicker than before, but not actually in a bad way. It's not like it's too thick or too heavy. It's still very slim at 1.68 centimeters tall and 2.2 kilograms for this model. But I do think in recent years Apple went a bit too far for the quest for thinness at the expense of some good features like removing MagSafe and some other useful ports. And they made their Pro notebooks thin just for the sake of being thin. Personally, if I wanted a thin laptop, I'd get a MacBook Air. My 2016 MacBook was the first MacBook Pro that featured the touch bar, the butterfly keyboard, and the all USB-C Thunderbolt port design. And that's all gone now. The function row has been reinstated, now with full height keys. The touch bar is gone, and to be honest, I don't really miss it. I did like it for some things like scrolling through a video or for seeing a visual of the Final Cut timeline, but I didn't like having it at the expense of losing the tactile keys. I wouldn't be against it coming back if we could keep the physical function row. I did like the dynamic shortcut buttons that would appear in different apps. I just didn't like using the touch bar for things like brightness and volume controls. I would also accidentally hit the Siri button far too often, and the touch bar would just randomly freeze on me and lock me out from using Touch ID until it decided to come back to life or I did a restart. But we do still get to keep Touch ID on the new design for authenticating logins and payments, which is just a joy to use. I was lucky to never really have any issues with the butterfly keys on my last MacBook. A number of people though had problems with the keys sticking or becoming unresponsive, but I did never quite get used to the shallow depth they had when typing on them. We're back now to the trusty scissor mechanism, and it just feels so much better to type on with the extra key travel. And the whole keyboard just looks so sleek set into the double anodized Blackwell. Plus it still has the sound great Force Touch trackpad. I'm really happy to see that MagSafe is back. This third generation has a slimmer connector. The included cable is also braided, which will hopefully make it more durable, and it can fast charge up to 50% in 30 minutes, which is fantastic. And hopefully together they'll save a few Macs from being whipped off a desk. It's on the left side, along with 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports and a 3.5mm headphone jack with support for high impedance headphones. And on the right side, HDMI 2 is returned along with a third Thunderbolt 4 port and an SD XT card slot. Again, I'm really happy it's back, no need to carry an adapter. No matter which version of the Touch Bar MacBook Pro you might have, be it a 2016 one like mine or a newer version, battery life has had a massive jump with the new redesign, and that's thanks mainly to the efficiency that Apple's been able to get from their M series chips. We now get pretty much double the movie playback time at 21 hours, and 14 hours of wireless web browsing. And in my use, it's been really hard to kill the battery on this. Granted, my 2016 MacBook was sitting at just over 80% battery health after 6 years of use, but even still, when I first had it, I could easily drain it with medium to heavy use, so I'd often only edit and do heavy workloads on mains power. But this new MacBook easily lasts me all day with mixed and heavy use. I've edited in Final Cut on battery and it's hardly made a dent, and I'm just really impressed with the battery life. Overall, my first impressions here are really positive. The new design is definitely a course correction from before, and I'm really glad that Apple took on some of the criticisms of the previous design and brought back things like MagSafe, the SD card slot, and the scissor mechanism keyboard. The display is stunning for HDR content. ProMotion makes scrolling and moving around the OS feel so much smoother and more intuitive. Performance from the M1 Max chip is incredibly impressive from a notebook, which you can take with you anywhere. It's going to make editing videos for the channel a breeze and just mean that I'm spending a lot less time just waiting around for things to render. And I'm confident that it will last me for many years to come, just like my previous 2 MacBook Pros. And for anyone looking for something slimmer and lighter, there is a 14-inch model which can be configured just as high as the 16-inch performance-wise. The only real differences being screen size and battery life. My config is the stock M1 Max, which comes in at £3,300 here in the UK. And for those that are wondering, as a refurb, it came with a £330 discount. Let me know your thoughts on Apple's latest MacBook Pros, or if you've got any questions, you can drop them in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, remember to hit the like button, it really helps the channel out. And if you'd like to see more tech videos from me, you can hit subscribe and the bell. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.